Z. When I spoke to you before we put it up, I remember it was almost like a slow boil, that you almost had trouble processing it. And then as the day went on and the reaction came in, I felt you got angrier and angrier.
Exactly, I did. And then I called Doc Rivers, his coach, and I called Chris Paul. I talked to him. I said, this is the guy that you're playing for. He really don't want you, but it's almost like a slave mentality. And so I'm glad that Commissioner Silver did a wonderful job of jumping on top of that.
Effective immediately, I am banning Mr. Sterling for life.
I'm glad he had to lose his franchise because it's, you know, you can't treat people that way or say things about people and don't think that nothing won't happen. And I'm a person who loves people, no matter what their race is, no matter what their gender is. I just love people. And then there's other people in this country just driving racism. It just makes me upset. And it's too bad that we still have to deal with that.
Well, I will say, for my part, there are few people in my lifetime I admire more than you, and I am honored to have been able to sit with you and do this interview.
And this is really unique and special, so thank you.
Right back at you.
Thanks. You're gonna make me cry up in here.
Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Lisa Booth is here with us for the whole hour. We'll also be joined tonight by Governor Mike Huckabee and Ainsley Earhart. Well, it's July the 4th next week, and as we look forward to that and look back on a truly momentous week in politics, it's important to remember some deep truths about America and our system of government, because that system is under threat today. I studied America's system of government at Oxford University. I don't say that to show how clever I am, but in fact, the exact opposite. They didn't teach me very much at all, and it wasn't until I actually lived here that I understood the true genius of America's founders and what they put in place. A few years ago, I took my sons to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. There's a regular live performance there telling the story of the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War, and the years leading up to the Constitutional Convention. It literally moved me to tears with its powerful expression of the beautiful idea at the heart of America, an idea which had never been expressed by any nation before, liberty under the law. From that and from those incomparable founding documents come all the things that are special about America, things that are so different and better than where I grew up in England. I see the power of those American virtues every day now in a way that all those clever professors never managed to teach me at Oxford University, but I also see them under threat. A pluribus unum, the founders said. From many, one. From that flows the wonderful American virtue of the melting pot, where everyone is welcome as long as they become Americans. But the melting pot is cracking under the same forces of uncontrolled immigration and insufficient integration that produced the disaster of multiculturalism in Europe. The Declaration of Independence talked about England's history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object an absolute tyranny over these states. The principle of maximum self-government is guaranteed by the 10th Amendment. But today, we see a vast bureaucratic federal government machine as centralizing as the unaccountable European Union. And then perhaps the simplest, but in many ways my favorite expression of America's unique virtue, the brilliant decision, hotly debated by the founders, about what to call the head of state. Not Your Majesty, not Your Excellency, not Your Highness, but Mr. President. That attitude, everyone equal under the law, nobody better than anyone else, led to the entrepreneurialism and pioneering spirit that made America the greatest nation in the history of the world. But what's happened to that attitude today? We have a sneering elite in Washington, in New York, and in Silicon Valley that do believe they're better than everyone else. And then finally, the one thing that underpins all these great American virtues, the Constitution. President Trump was duly elected according to the Constitution, But the Democrat and Republican establishments have worked non-stop to undermine his legitimacy. Look at the biggest and most consequential political event of this year, the retirement of Justice Kennedy, announced last week. Immediately, the talk on the left was about blocking President Trump's nominee. This from the same people who constantly accuse President Trump of undermining the rule of law. The melting pot, decentralized government, a republic of equals, a constitution enshrining the precious idea of people power. It's under threat today, and we need to fight for it. That is the next revolution we need. Tell me what you think at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton Next. Joining me now to discuss, former Arkansas governor, Fox News contributor and host of Huckabee on TBN, Mike Huckabee, and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth. Lisa, let me start with you on this. When you think about all the big political debates going on now, immigration and just recently the Supreme Court decision, it feels like they really go to the heart of, as I was just saying, everything that's really important about America. This is a really big moment, I think, when those foundational values are really being tested and threatened.
Well, absolutely. We're seeing those tested, Steve. And look, you had talked about the importance of decentralized government. We know what Democrats believe in this, and I think that was part of, the charge with President Trump and wanting a Republican in power. Look what happened under President Obama during his campaign, the Life of Julia campaign. What do Democrats want? They want power of government from cradle to the grave, and that was the emphasis of that Life of Julia campaign that President Obama ran, and that's what the Democrats want. They want that power. They want to be in charge of, our lives from start to finish, essentially.
Governor, there's so much to unpack in all this. Where do you think we stand with all these big arguments that are riling everyone up? How do you see it?
Steve, first, let me compliment you on the monologue. It was brilliant, and I wish that every American would hear it. They might get a perspective about how to embrace their own nation, and I wish they would. But what troubles me most is that a lot of Americans seem to miss this important point. Our founders gave us the most magnificent gift. They gave us a government that we had the power to change when we didn't like it. But the manner in which we change it is through the ballots, not the bullets. In other words, we have a chance every 2 years to go and completely change our government through the House. We can change the Senate, and every 4 years we can change a president. And typically what happens when one side is given the opportunity to govern, and they don't do it very well, the American people say, "You're fired. We're going to let someone else have a shot." What's different now is that while President Trump was elected president by a majority of the electors in this country. Now, Hillary can whine, well, more popular, but it's immaterial. He won the election overwhelmingly. People need to say, okay, let him govern. And if in 4 years we don't like the way he's getting the job done, we can fix it. But you can't just stop governing, and you can't just gum up the works like the Democrats are. And the worst thing is calling people Nazis and racists because they just don't like the way you believe and the way that you're practicing and governing.
I think that's such an important point, the way that your phrase gumming up the works. I mean, Lisa, that was the immediate reaction, wasn't it, to the news about the new Supreme Court vacancy last week. On the left, it was like, well, we got to stop it.
Well,
that's the first reaction. We got to go. We got to organise and march and go on the streets. And, we got to stop this. Forget about the Constitution. It's got to be stopped.
But even before that, I mean, go back to after President Trump first won, you had Democrats calling for faithless electors and for them to buck the voters in their state and vote against President Trump. And ultimately, it ended up hurting Hillary Clinton more than President Trump because you had more faithless electors that bucked Hillary Clinton than for President Trump. But I think that really demonstrated sort of this undermining of the Trump administration from the start was with that. And then comes the Russia investigation and all these other things that Democrats have tried to utilize to undermine the legitimacy of President Trump. And to Governor Huckabee's point, let the president govern. And if you don't like it, show up at the midterm elections or show up at 2020 and make a difference then. But these sort of bullying tactics and mob mentality that we've seen from the left on so many instances, you look at what happened to Attorney General Pam Bondi, look what happened to the governor's daughter. You look at people showing up outside of Secretary Nielsen's home, outside of Secretary Chow's home as well. That is not America, and that is not going to make a difference. And you know, if they want to make a difference, show up at the polls.
Well, it's such a great point, and a perfect link to my next question to you, Governor, which is going to come back to something obviously very personal to you and your family. And I just would love to hear from you directly, you know, a week or so on from when it happened, how you're feeling about the way Sarah was targeted in that restaurant and what it says about what's going on in our political culture generally.
Well, Steve, it was first an example of bullying, and it was an example of bigotry. The bullying being thrown out of a restaurant, not because she was misbehaving or making a scene, but because she was just simply there. That's bullying. Secondly, it's bigotry when you attack someone simply because of what they believe. Again, not what they were doing, but what they believe. That's not the kind of America where people have freedom. But the bigger concern I have is not that she was thrown out of a restaurant. It's that you have Looney Tunes like Hollywood actor Peter Fonda, who actually publicly tweeted that someone should break into her house and kidnap her children. Now, nobody who says that kind of thing should spend the night at home. They need to be spending the night in jail, charged with both the California crime and the federal crime that they committed of encouraging people to do harm to another.
And Governor, what do you say to those, and I've heard this a lot on the left, who say, well, that's all fine, very well, but you know, this angry response from the left, it's all just really in response to President Trump. He started it. He's the one with the inflammatory rhetoric, and he's the one that has brought this coarseness and incivility into our debates. What do you say to that?
Well, again, it's nonsense. I mean, the president did not encourage that kind of violence. Just a complete disaster for anybody to think that it's okay to start throwing people out of restaurants, or that it is okay for there to be some kind of bigoted action that encourages violence. And that's what we're seeing on the left. It's not just a strongly worded disagreement. It's actually the encouragement of violence.
Well, and Steve, I also think it's important to point out that we've seen violence. I mean, look at the shooting and the attempted assassination of Republican members of Congress with Steve Scalise. The guy was anti-Trump. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter. There was a member of Congress from Tennessee who was run off the road. The woman got out and pounded on the doors of his car. There was another instance where Martha McSally, a guy, is serving 15 months in federal prison for threatening to kill her. So this hasn't just been these bullying tactics. We've seen violence as well. But, you know, that doesn't often get discussed. But I think it's important to discuss that, to put some of these other bullying tactics into context about how they could quickly turn into a horrific incident.
Great points. Lisa, thank you so much. You're going to stay with us, Governor. Really appreciate you joining us. See you soon, I hope.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And coming up, Ainsley Earhardt joins the conversation. Don't go away. Co-host of Fox & Friends and author of The Light Within Me, Ainsley Earhardt. Ainsley, there you are. The last time we were together, we were drinking beer in a London pub.
No, so, I feel left out.
Lisa, it was so much fun. We were there for the royal wedding. And Steve showed me all around London and his neck of the woods and the restaurant where he found out that his wife was pregnant with their second child. It was just a really special time. We had fun. And that beer that they serve over there, it tasted like a Blue Moon, but it was something else. I took a picture of it. I can't seem to find it here in the States. But
now I'm really jealous.
It's so good.
Good times, Lisa. Yeah, we'll have to do another road trip. Exactly. So on to more serious matters. Ainsley, we've been talking about July the 4th and the Constitution and all the things that make America special. And it seems to me that one of the things about the whole notion of limited government that America's all about is that actually government shouldn't be the most important thing in our lives. Politics shouldn't be the most important thing. It's actually things like family and faith and community that really are the foundation of a strong society. And right now, with all this kind of political arguing and and anger out there, it seems to me that those things are really threatened as well. How do you see it?
Well, you know, you can't lose faith, and you have to trust God through each situation, each season in your life. And our country is going through an interesting season. I feel like we're all very fortunate because we got to know the greatest generation, our grandparents, and then our parents learned from them, and they were hard workers, and they taught us the importance of going to church and saying your prayers and saying a blessing before you eat, being grateful and thankful and working hard. They taught us that you can't forget from where you came, that everyone is equal, everyone is God's child. Attitude determines aptitude. To work really hard. Don't expect to get the big job when you graduate from college. It takes 20 years to get that job. And they taught us the importance of loving your neighbor as yourself and the golden rule. And those principles, you know, I feel like I don't know if it's our society has gotten so far away from going to church or from God. And I think that our country needs that. I think individuals need that because that gives us the foundation for being great parents and being great stewards and for being great employees and friends. And I think that if we could find God and learn to love each other and not be so angry at someone else just because they have a different political opinion, I think we'll be much better off as a country, and to learn to compromise.
Oh my gosh, I think so many people would just hear that and agree so passionately with what you just said. Lisa, I know I'm sure you agree, but one thing I've noticed is that you talk often about your family and how important that is as a foundation for you. How do you see that fitting into all this?
Well, your family has been everything in my life. I mean, I look at, you know, struggles I've been through, and I don't know how I could have gone through them without that strong family unit. And every time I go back to visit my family, I'm with them. It sort of refocuses you, and you realize what is actually important in life. It's God, it's family. You know, it's not politics, it's not all these other frivolous things that are going on in the country. And there's not only a ton of social research to back up the importance of a family unit, a child being raised by their two biological parents, but as I just testified, I've seen it in my own life. I mean, I really, my heart breaks for people that don't have that in their life, because I don't think I would be the person I am today if I didn't have two loving parents and that close-knit family. I mean, it is literally everything in my life and the thing that I value the most in my life.
And Ainsley, do you think that it's becoming harder to be that kind of parent in America today? I mean, how to speak not just personally for yourself, but just generally looking at the way things are going, do you think it's harder?
I think the conversations are a lot different than they were when we were growing up. I think kids are learning just about some harsh realities earlier probably, but listen, there is scripture that says, take heart, I have overcome the world. All this is in God's hands. He knew that this was going to happen, and it's all going to be okay. You know, Lisa was talking about the struggles in her life, and you have to realize if you don't understand why God's taking you through something right now, you eventually will, and you just have to have blind faith. And you know, we've done so many stories recently on suicides and famous people that are taking their own lives, and we're all going through, you know, our country is just faced with so many stresses, and we're all working longer hours, and we're all stressed out about how we're going to provide school for our kids, or we're going through hardships, and you just have to take a step back and remember it's all going to be okay. Try to have a positive attitude and be grateful for the many blessings that you do have, and just turn to God and get on your knees and cry out to Him, and just try to be the best that you can, and remember to hang on to the positive messages that your friends are giving you, and turn to your friends if you're having a struggle.
So I think, Lisa, one of the things that takes away from that kind of, the way Ainsley put it there is so human. It's about the individual and the family and things that everyone can relate to very directly and personally. And I think one of the things that has taken us away from that actually is also contradicts something very profound in the Constitution, which is that power and government should be local wherever possible and decentralized, because the minute you centralize everything, it becomes very big and bureaucratic, and we forget the human scale. So I think there is something we can actually do to get back to what Ainsley's talking about.
Well, and I think far too often, especially on the left, there's this reaching out to the government for the answers, when I think the answers rely on ourselves, they rely on our family units, and they rely on our community. And I think part of the reason why we're having such a breakdown in this country is, one, the lack of emphasis on family, the lack of emphasis on community. Everyone is inward facing, as opposed to, you know, seeing your neighbors as just another human being, your neighbor. And I think a lot of that has to do with even just social media in itself, the fact that people go online as a sense of community as opposed to getting out, meeting your neighbors and seeing each other. And I think that breakdown really hurts us as a country, because if you no longer see the person next to you as just a neighbor, a fellow American, then you could easily see how people turn to kind of this desensitized rhetoric, this sort of tribalism, this mob mentality, and a lot of the evilness and ugliness that we're seeing in the country right now, which is really sad.
Yeah, Steve, and I think also keep it simple. I mean, I remember growing up, my dad, he was just so nice to everyone. The garbage men would come out, we could hear them. He's feeding us breakfast in the kitchen. My mom was a school teacher. She was already at school. He's feeding us breakfast. He could hear the garbage men like clinking the tops of the garbage cans together, because all they wanted was Dad to bring out orange juice for him and donuts or toast with peanut butter on it. And Dad was always so nice, and he always did that. My mom happens to be in a rehab facility because she had a stroke. And the other day, my mom made cookies for my father for Father's Day with her therapist. And Dad took all the cookies around to all of the patients on the hall and gave them each cookies, even though many of them were diabetics and couldn't eat them. But he's just so kind. And I think if you see a protester and you don't agree with what they're protesting, just remind yourself that they're God's children. They're entitled to their own opinions. Love one another. Try to be kind. Do the right thing. Dad would pick up the stray dogs, and then he would find, look at their tag, call their owners. If he couldn't find their owners, we would keep the dogs. I mean, he's taught us so many great lessons, and I think just keep it simple and love other people.
Ainsley, I think that's such a great lesson for all of us. Brilliant way to end it. Thank you so much for joining us. Lisa, stick around.
Thank you, Steve.
Coming up, one of the biggest revolutions that has changed everyone's lives in the last few years is technology, and especially those wretched smartphones. What exactly are they doing to our kids, and what can we do about that? Find out after the break. Today means you have no choice but to deal with the fact that your children spend a huge amount of time on social media. But do you really know what they're doing on their smartphones? What sites are they on, and how much time are they spending online? Here's Anita Vogel with the story.
It's hard to spot anyone in a crowd today without a phone in their hand, talking, texting, snapping, or posting pictures. It's especially true when it comes to teenagers. According to a new Pew Research Center survey, 95% of U.S. teens ages 13 to 17 have access to smartphones. And of those teens, 45% say they're online almost constantly.
I am surprised. I think that kids want to present themselves as being somewhat balanced, and yet in this study the kids were more than willing to admit that they spend most of their lives looking at or interacting with digital devices.
I'm pretty sure everyone I know has a smartphone.
15-year-old Henry Deakins admits he spends quite a bit of time on his phone.
How often are you on your phone? Way too often.
Yeah, probably more than I should be. But I do have other things to do, so I can't constantly be on my phone.
One of the things that keeps Henry busy is football. As a mother of 3 boys, his mom, Joni, says it's a priority to make sure he interacts with his peers in person.
He certainly cannot hold a phone when he's on the football field, And that's how they get their core group of friends, too. So if your child is sitting in their room on the computer and on the phone all day, then figure out something for them to do.
Until just recently, Facebook was the dominant social media platform for America's teens. Not anymore. In 2018, it's YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat. The Pew study goes on to say teens have mixed views on social media, with 31% reporting a mostly positive effect, 45% neither positive nor negative, and 24% mostly negative. Henry and his mom say their experience with social media as a family has been mostly positive, as a tool to keep up with relatives and friends, and with Henry using Twitter and Facebook to communicate with football coaches recruiting for college.
Posting things about your football career and linking your highlights to your bio or anything like that that'll get the coaches interested.
As for the negative, many parents report frustration with never really knowing what their kids are looking at when their eyes are glued to the screen. USC digital social media professor Karen North says these days kids are under pressure that leads to misrepresenting who they really are.
People are always posting exaggerated or embellished images of themselves or of their activities or of their happiness, and nobody could ever measure up to what they find online.
Professor North also points out, like it or not, we live in a digital world now. You can only limit your kids' exposure to a certain degree. She advises from an early age to keep these devices in the family room and take an interest in what your kids are looking at online, no matter how uninterested you might actually be. Steve?
All right, thanks, Anita. I'm joined now to discuss all this with A.B. Stoddard, editor at Real Clear Politics, and Jim Steyer, founder and CEO of Common Sense Media. A.B., let me start with you. I mean, look, the evidence of the harm here is just mounting all the time. Just this week, I was reading of some research that was talking about kids storing risque photos in vault apps that look like something as innocent as a calculator, and then trading those photos like baseball cards. Finsters, fake Instagram feeds to fool parents. I know this is really personal for you. One of the ideas that I've been advocating for a while now is that we should simply take drastic action and ban smartphones, not all phones, just smartphones that are internet connected, for under 16s. People have said that's a crazy idea, but I'm dead serious about it. Where do you stand on all this?
Well, Steve, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this. I have 3 teenagers, 2 rising juniors and a rising sophomore. They've had phones since they were 13, since they went to a middle school far enough away that it became, we thought, something that they needed for security reasons to be in touch with us. It's very hard to keep these phones away from adolescents these days, as parents are finding everywhere. It really makes them outcasts if they don't have them. But I agree with your premise. The frontal lobe, and I'm not a doctor, but I've read enough about it, is not fully developed till 25. So we get the chance to vote and to drive and to drink all before that lobe that determines judgment is fully matured and developed. Using the phone constantly, all day long, every day, from your young teenage years until that lobe is fully developed, is going to have an enormous impact on the teen brain and follow you for the rest of your lives. So you and I are in this generation in between when these didn't exist and we couldn't imagine them, to having children who are digital natives. And we're sort of this last generation, the only generation, who can see the before. And I think when we look back at this time, Steve, we're going to discover that the unintended consequences were incredibly damaging. There's much to be said about the good and the benefits of the Internet of information and social media, but there's also very worrisome signs that we're going to look back and wonder why we didn't put guardrails up as soon as possible.
Well, I agree with everything. I think you put it very well. Jim, I mean, you're in the whole business. You've been one of the leading figures in our country for putting up those guardrails. That's pretty a good definition of what you do at Common Sense Media. It seems to me your position is that you think it can be controlled rather than taking the more drastic action. Is that how you see it?
Well, I actually think you're making really good points, Steve. And, I'm a dad of 4, and I know you're a dad, so we look at it the same way. I would tell you this, addiction is a huge issue. I mean, over 50% of kids in the United States who are teenagers believe they're addicted to their cell phones. And as you know, Common Sense does research on this and speaks to about 100 million users a year on these issues. And you're right with all of your premises. I think it would be difficult to enact a ban, but I think that there has to be clear pressure exerted on the industry itself to find ways to get kids and adults, by the way, to put phones down. Remember, as adults, you're the most important role model for your kids. So I think we all have to look at this seriously. I think it would be hard to enact a ban, but I do think that this discussion is critically important for every parent, every kid, every school. And so the more we talk about it, the better. And I think you're taking a more extreme position isn't a bad idea. I expect that out of you anyway, Steve. But I actually think it's an incredibly important conversation, my friend.
And do you think, just because you're like me, you're based here in California, in the heart of the tech industry, do you see any evidence that the big tech companies, particularly not just Facebook and Google and all the rest of it, who provide the apps, but companies like Apple who make the smartphones, are they taking this more seriously?
They definitely are. And Steve, I know the people who run all of those companies quite well, and as do you. And yes, I would say Apple in particular has started to take this very seriously. They just introduced a major new set of features that are actually designed for balance use of the cell phone. Of all the companies, I think Apple takes this the most seriously and most responsibly. But the app makers, and the Facebooks of the world and the Instagrams and the Snapchats and the YouTubes have got to get their act together on this. They should be, we've asked them for years to join our device-free dinner campaign, which is about put your blanking phone down and pay attention to the people you're with. So I actually think this is something where the public needs to speak up. The viewers of this show need to be talking to companies like Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and saying you should be messaging to young people about put your phone away and pay attention, the dangers of addiction, the dangers of bullying. So I actually think this is one where public pressure can have a big impact on the industry. I think it's going to be tough to legislate use, but we could really educate the public and also pressure the companies to do much more to have a balanced approach to this.
AB, I mean, that all makes sense, and it's encouraging to hear that the companies are taking it more seriously, but it puts a lot of weight on the parents, doesn't it, that they're the ones that have to do all the work here. Somehow that seems unfair to me. AB, what's your take on that?
I agree. I just wish that the community at large would discourage and sort of shame all of this widespread phone use. You know, I was at a funeral this week. No one was going to take their phone out. You know, when I'm with you, Steve, unfortunately, we're on a news set, and I'm worried that if I don't see something on Twitter, I won't be up to date. But when we're at, you know, when we're not right on set, I don't use my phone around you because you don't have a phone. And I think that if there was a tone set and a debate that was started about addiction and about sort of how much more alienating, especially for adolescents, phone use is, because you're not out reading physical signals from people in conversation. You're not perceiving how they're talking to you, what might be bothering them. You're not learning the art of really just being with people in conversation, confronting awkwardness, having empathy, all those things. You're instead reading about the great time your friend says they had last night with the awesome photos that they've posted about it while you were at home the night before, not invited, on your phone. I think that this kind of a conversation beyond the industries that brought us this revolution, pretty much. I think that somehow between Apple and the parents, there has to be something else. There has to be teachers, coworkers, more phone-free zones, and a bigger debate about what this really is going to cost us in terms of lack of community, isolation, and again, addiction. You can give up drugs and alcohol. It is hard if you're an addict, but you will always have to be on technology. And if you're addicted by age 17, you had a life of trouble ahead of you.
Yeah, really well said. Thank you, AB, and thank you, Jim. Jim, also for your work. I think common sense media is something everyone should know about, and you've been really leading the charge on all this, so we really appreciate that. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this more because I know the audience it's something they're really concerned about. Thank you both very much.
Great to see you, Steve.
Well, you've seen her on the show before, Lenore Skenazy. She's the pioneer of the free-range kids movement. She's got some updates for us on that. Well, in our country, as many on the left try to shape the way we talk and think about our culture and everything else. But how is it affecting our parenting and our families? With me now, one of our favorite people, president of Let Grow and founder of Free Range Kids, Lenore Skenazy. Another favorite person, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth is still with us. Great to see you both. Lenore, let me start with you. Look, everyone's getting ready for July the 4th, and, you know, people like to be outside and so on, but it seems to me that so much of what people love about America and being outdoors and being with their family and their children, is the bureaucrats are trying to ruin it with their stupid rules. What's the latest on all of that?
Well, I'll tell you, it is very hard to feel confident about sending your kids outside when you know that, except in Utah, which passed the free-range parenting law, you can possibly be harassed or even investigated for letting your kid have the most basic freedom, which is the freedom of your body to go outside and enjoy the 4th of July weather. So really, I'm so pleased that Utah had passed this law, which says it's not against the law if a parent thinks their kid is ready to walk outside, play outside, go get a hot dog, or even wait at home briefly while they're going out and doing something, or if they have to come home late. So it's basically the freedoms that we would like to assume all parents have, which is the freedom to parent as they see fit. We have to fight to get it back.
And Lisa, this is just another manifestation, isn't it, of kind of over government, the way that bureaucrats and the administrative state that we talk about in other contexts politically are just kind of taking over in areas where they just have absolutely no business.
Well, absolutely. Trying to take away parents from making decisions over how they want to raise their kids. And not only that, I really worry that we're sort of building a really weak future generation with all the political correctness on college campus, trigger warnings, microaggressions, whatever people are calling it these days. Because look, life is tough and we need to build strong individuals that are going to go on and be able to, one, address those issues on their own, make their own determinations about the people around them, and two, are going to be prepared for being around people that are different, that don't share the same belief system as them, don't share the same ideology as them, and also who are going to be offended in the workforce from time to time. And I worry that we're just building a really weak future generations, and I think that's concerning just for the country at large.
There is this worry now. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I totally agree with Lisa.
No, you go right ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree that if you treat your children as fragile and if you're almost forced to treat them as fragile, that they can't handle a spat. I mean, one of the examples I love to give because it's so appalling is that a couple of years ago, Parents Magazine had an article about play dates, which you'd think you wouldn't need an article about play dates. But one of the questions asked by a parent was, if my kid is old enough to stay at home alone for a little while I go out to the dry cleaner, can I do that if she has a play date over? And the magazine, which is supposedly telling us how to raise our children, said absolutely not. You want to be there in case your child and the other girl have a spat. You want to be able to intervene. And to Lisa's point, that is assuming that kids can't figure things out on their own, even a disagreement, even a brief moment of anger or frustration. But in fact, if parents are always intervening, or if there's always somebody that your child is supposed to talk to instead of dealing with this themselves, they don't learn how to deal with somebody with a different point of view. They think that discomfort equals danger because everything is presented as unsafe. But in fact, discomfort is part of life. And to Lisa's point, you want kids to get used to a little rough and tumble, used to standing up for what they believe, or maybe even hearing something they don't believe and considering it, and maybe it does make sense. And they're going to be at college and they're going to be at the workforce, and that is certainly coming at them. To tell them that discomfort equals something that should never happen to them doesn't make sense.
Well, and it's also character. Sure. Well, I was going to say it's also character building as well. And, the age of sort of participation trophies, or I think that was the cheerleading story where the girl didn't make the team and it caused this uproar. Sometimes you don't win. And if you don't win, you need to learn to suck it up, to get back out there, to come back smarter, stronger, to work harder. And those sort of things are character building, to lose and to learn how to, want to win, to embetter yourself, to go out and be a better person, to be smarter, work harder, and, try to make the team the next time or win the trophy the next time. So I really am concerned about sort of this weakening of people in this country.
Amen to that. Well, Lenore is fighting back with some great successes, as we've seen in Utah with the free-range kids law there. So thank you so much for that work, Lenore, and for joining us. Lisa, see you in a minute. Coming up, we're in the middle of the World Cup, but the US team is nowhere to be seen. Why is that? Welcome back, everyone. The World Cup is in full swing. There's no men's US team there. Why is that? And what can we do to fix it? Well, here's someone with an interesting answer. He says we need a real revolution in the way we teach soccer. Joining me now, author of Shoeless Soccer, Fixing the System and Winning the World Cup, Nathan Richardson. So, Nathan, thanks for joining us. Tell us what Shoeless Soccer is all about.
Well, thank you. Shoeless soccer is really about the way we're playing the game at the most basic grassroots level. You could talk to any number of experts right now, and they'll tell you all about what's wrong at the highest levels. The president of U.S. Soccer, the coach, the players. Our book is about what's happening at the most basic level, the level where our kids learn to play the game. And unless you address that, all that other stuff is lipstick on a pig. Because what we're doing right now is we're not allowing our kids to play the beautiful game that is being played in the rest of the world and that is winning World Cups. We're playing soccer, or what we would argue is we're not actually playing soccer. We're practicing soccer, we're training kids to win soccer games, but our kids aren't playing soccer.
So let's get specific about that. I think what you're talking about is the way that kids, I think, are required in the way they're coached to play sort of formal games really early versus learning skills. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's definitely part of it. The other day I went for a run around a park here locally where two of the elite programs in this region practice. And there were about 12 teams playing the game or practicing at the time. I ran around there for an hour and I didn't see a single game being played. All the players were drilling, they're working on skills, they're working on all sorts of varieties of skill-based games with coaches carefully watching them, but nobody was playing soccer. Our kids don't play soccer. Now, that's not the only problem, but if we would allow our kids to play soccer, they would end up doing a lot of the things that a child naturally does when they're trying to have fun. If you look at the way soccer is played in the rest of the world, if you go to Argentina or Spain, for example, there was a recent piece in the New York Times on the way soccer is played in France, where many of the national team players are learning to play soccer. And these kids are playing on hard surfaces with all sorts of varieties of balls, without coaches watching them, without referees telling them how to play the game, and they're playing a very creative, a very fast-paced game. What we do here in this country is you sign your kid up at age 3 or 4 for a very organized league. They get a nice uniform, they get nice shoes, they put on shin guards, they get a regulation size ball, and they've got a coach watching them from day one. They're kicking a ball through 3, 4, 5 inches of grass. Imagine the way a ball travels to get through 3, 4, 5 inches of grass. And then you think about the kind of grass that's being played in the World Cup. It's like comparing Wimbledon, learning to play tennis on your front lawn because they play Wimbledon on grass. And so we begin with these very basic principles because we have, yeah.
I just wanted to quickly get, because we don't have too much time. What's the shoeless part? You talk about shoeless soccer. Where's that come into it?
Well, shoeless is the extreme example of getting rid of all this equipment. So we put our kids in fancy shoes, we put our kids in shin guards, we put our kids on really highly organized teams with fancy uniforms. And what we're saying is we need to strip everything away. Now, we're not naive enough to believe that we can go back to the way things were in 1950s Brazil. But if you think about the way Pelé learned to play the game, he learned to play the game barefoot. We actually, with a number of our kids this last year, we actually had them play barefoot all winter long. We had them play indoors, barefoot with all sorts of different kinds of balls, different sizes of fields, and the improvement we saw was tremendous.
Nathan, I'm so sorry we had to cut you off, but we have to leave it there. So appreciate your work on this, and we'll get back to it another time because I think it's so important. Thank you very much. Coming up, Lisa Booth is back with final thoughts. Don't go away.